How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today is Thursday, September 12th. We are starting another week here in the NFL. Week 2 kicks off with the Buffalo Bills taking on the Miami Dolphins. That will be the first segment. We'll be previewing it, going over the key factors, the matchups, and the latest news from that game. Then we'll be talking about Jalen Hurts in his last performance against the Green Bay Packers down in Brazil. Yeah, the Eagles won, but is there a cause for concern for Jalen Hurts? And based on how he played, should we be worried? And also some more topics down the line as well. To kick off this second week in the NFL, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show. And also, if you guys have any questions, comments, or opinions of yours that you'd like to share, we want to hear about it. Don't hesitate to drop anything that you have to say in the live chat. Your input is a big part of what makes this show great, and we thrive on your energy and its insights. So don't hesitate to drop anything in the chat. Now, if you want to make sure it is absolutely certain that you guys and your messages get shown on this show, there's a new way of going about that. You can use now the super chat feature available to you just by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This way it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content that you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit the super chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. But if you do prefer the alternative, there is still the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, where you could still tip and donate and leave any comment or question there as well. We couldn't do what we do without your amazing support, and we're always so thankful to you guys for helping us out in any way possible that you are able to do. So make sure to use that super chat button again with any question or comment. But now we can start talking about a new week in the NFL. Week 2 is upon us now. The kickoff to the first game of Week 2 for the NFL is in just about an hour or so, or actually an hour and a half here, my time, Eastern time. It'll be between the Buffalo Bills traveling down to Miami to take on the Dolphins on the first rendition of Thursday Night Football on Amazon Prime. Last week it was on NBC. Now we get a whole new crew to watch the game with, and a whole new broadcasting crew and everything like that. Kickoff is set for 8:15 Eastern Time. Both teams are 0-1 after comeback wins for both of these teams. It's the first AFC East matchup that we get to see as well in this early portion of the season. Last week, the Dolphins escaped with a last-second field goal from Jason Sanders to defeat the Jacksonville Jaguars at home. And also, the Buffalo Bills, like I mentioned, coming back from 17-3 down to the Arizona Cardinals to storm back and win that game 34-28, in large part because of Josh Allen. Both games had late offensive surges for both of these teams, and now I think heading into this week, short transition, right, just in the second week, these are the two best teams in the AFC East based on their performances, right, with the Jets dropping one to the 49ers, not looking great. Both of these teams, I think, showed why they're legitimate contenders. I don't have them as my top two. I have the Jets actually beating out the Bills, but right now the Bills are surprising me a little bit, and in this matchup, there is a resounding advantage in large part to the Buffalo Bills based on the recent performances and based on Josh Allen against the Miami Dolphins, because if you look at these stats that I have compiled here about these recent matchups between these two teams, heavy favorites to the Buffalo Bills for a bunch of reasons, right? The Bills have won 13 of the last 15 meetings in Miami. Since Sean McDermott took over as the head coach for the Buffalo Bills, the Bills have averaged about almost 32 points per game against Miami. Josh Allen has been chosen as the AFC Player of the Week 5 times after playing the Miami Dolphins, and also Josh Allen is 11-2 with 41 touchdowns against the Miami Dolphins. And lastly, on the other end, the Quarterback for the Miami Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa, not so impressive against the Bills. 7 interceptions and 6 touchdowns against Buffalo in his recent meetings. And all of that, again, is screaming that the Bills should probably win this game, even though it is in Miami. Just based on their recent success, they should be the favorites. But I think it could go a little bit different tonight for a couple reasons. But I will start with the Miami Dolphins, talking about them recently and any news about their team. You look at their running back situation. Raheem Mostert has already been ruled out from this game. He was ruled out yesterday with a chest injury. Devon Achane also is dealing with an injury. I think it was an ankle injury for him, but he is more of a game time decision as we get closer to kickoff here. He was a big part of the win last week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, 100 yards from scrimmage, a touchdown against the Jaguars in week 1. But if they aren't able to go, they still have Jeff Wilson. Their rookie Jalen Wright could get an opportunity, so we'll keep an eye on those throughout the show if any news drops on those situations. Then, like I mentioned before, it was a late showing from their offense in that game. It got a little scary there towards the end with the Jaguars being up, I want to say at one point 17-3 as well, or 17-7, something like that. And this offense really turned it on in the second half. Tua connected on some big plays to Tyreek Hill, obviously, Jalen Waddle, and that really got their offense going there towards the end. Their defense was another part of it in relation to that really impressed me as well. They shut out the Jaguars in the second half, and that also was something I wasn't expecting too much, just because there was a lot of change and turnaround with this defense over the offseason. Jalen Phillips was just coming back, but they got a good pass rush going. They got to Trevor Lawrence, and in that second half, they really closed the door on them to give their offense a good opportunity to win that game. And then on the other side of things, the Buffalo Bills come into this game without one of their defensive backs, Taron Johnson. A huge loss for them. If you're not too familiar with Taron Johnson, he's a very good slot, nickel, very resilient, very valuable in those packages and coverages and things like that. He's a bigger body as well, so you could use him in a lot of different ways. Can certainly tackle, can cover. One of the best pieces for the Buffalo Bills defense will not be playing tonight due to an injury, and that is where most of my concerns lie with Taron Johnson now playing. A lot of turnaround over the offseason, a lot of new pieces on this defense. Has me a little bit worried with the state of that side of the ball for the Bills. Then you look at the offensive side of the ball. Josh Allen dealt with a left wrist injury concerns, more so concerns, I would say, since their last game against the Cardinals. The way he fell, I'm sure you guys saw it, hurdling a Cardinals defender, getting into the end zone, going above and beyond like he usually does, Josh Allen, and staying relatively healthy throughout this entire time. That's just who he is as a player, but he did seem to bang up his wrist a little bit. I know that he was wearing a protective glove or something like that on his hand. He is cleared to play and everything like that, but it was uncertain if he was going to wear the glove during the game. We'll keep an eye on that as well. And 21 unanswered points versus the Cardinals, in large part to Josh Allen. 2 throwing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns in that game. Does everything for the Buffalo Bills, right? And I think that could continue tonight. But looking at some of the factors that really will impact this game, I'm looking at that defense, like I said, not only for the Bills and my concerns with it, but also the Dolphins, right? Overall, in this game, I'm feeling like there could be a lot of points just from what we saw last week. In an instant, there could be a huge play, and that, unleashes this wave of just points after points in this game. With the talent of Josh Allen, Tyreek, Jalen, Waddle on the other side, and Tua as well, I'm expecting a lot of points, and I really want to see, for this factor, which defense kind of steps up to the challenge and stops the opposing offense for a couple drives, one drive here, one drive later, in crucial moments, things like that. The pass rush, similarly, Russo and Von Miller on one side, Jalen Phillips on the other, and going on to the next factor in this game, the running games, right? The passing is pretty elite when you're talking about these quarterbacks, especially Josh Allen, but controlling the pace, I think, is going to make the difference. You don't just want to go back and forth, right? It's not sustainable, but if you throw in a couple runs in there, get James Cook involved a little bit more, I think that'll be very fascinating to see who has more success in doing so. James Cook on one side, potentially no A-Chain on the other side, so it could be Jeff Wilson and rookie Jalen Wright could get an opportunity like I mentioned before. And then just the last factor for me, the quarterbacks. How much do the Bills need Josh Allen in this game, right? Where you're dealing with a couple of new pieces at wide receiver. The tight ends didn't really get involved too much last week, and neither did James Cook. It was really the Josh Allen show. I'll be interested to see if the Dolphins allow Josh to be as dominant in this game. And on the other side, Tua struggled, has struggled with the Bills, but also struggled a little bit last week in that first half. With so much differences on this Bills defense now, I'm wondering if that sort of unlocks Tua now with new pieces still trying to get integrated into everything. Does he have more success against this group now going forward? It's a big monkey on their back, right? The Dolphins don't seem to be able to beat the Bills just based on everything, but I think tonight is going to be their night. I have the Miami Dolphins winning with a good amount of points. I think they're going to win 30-20. That's my prediction. I don't like really the makeup of this Bills defense, so because of that, the Cardinals put up 28 points on them. They just couldn't keep pace offensively, and also their defense just isn't very good. I'm very impressed with the Dolphins defense. I like Jalen Phillips. I like Javon Holland a lot. Their safety, Jalen Ramsey, obviously. They have certain playmakers on that defense that I think could take away some of the better weapons for the Bills in this game. Then also, just keeping that pressure on the Buffalo Bills, right? Because as much as they do have nice players like Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, James Cook, I think the Dolphins are in a more advanced stage with their offense, and keeping the pressure on Josh Allen to kind of have to do everything, I think could work in their benefit if they just end up burning him out. But we'll see. I have the Dolphins winning. It'll be a big win for them just because, again, they can't seem to beat the Bills recently. So we're going to go with that. I think the Dolphins move to 2-0 and the Bills fall to 500 at 1-1. But that's not the last of football that we have to talk about. Any projections as well. Coming up after the break, we're going to go back all the way to the Brazil game. We talked about Saquon, but we didn't talk about Jalen Hurts. There's been some concerns recently talked about from Jalen Hurts' performance. Despite the win, should we be worried about how Jalen Hurts played individually? I'll have the answers to that after we come back. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Jumping straight back into the action here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Like I said before the break, we're going to go all the way back to the Brazil game. A great game, a fantastic game in South America for the NFL, but a 34-point win for the Philadelphia Eagles. They put up 34 points. They didn't win by 34 points. Against another great NFC team, it didn't tell the whole story, though, I think, for a lot of people that have dissected it a little bit more, and it has been brought to my attention now. Obviously watching the game, but I think it's become more of a bigger topic as the days have gone on. Obviously, Saquon's performance stole the show in the end. 3 touchdowns in his debut with the Eagles. The way that he ran it, fitting seamlessly into this team. It looks like he's been there his whole career, but that was the main grab of everything, right? That's what everybody gravitated towards, but there have been some concerns, if you weren't watching the game or anything like that, with how Jalen Hurts performed at certain points in this game that I think people and myself, now looking at it a little bit more in depth, have started to pick up on, and I wanted to bring it up here to get your guys' thoughts on any of these concerns, right? Because you look at Jalen Hurts and how he played against the Green Bay Packers. He finished 20 of 34 for 278 yards with 2 touchdowns, but also 2 interceptions as well. If you remember those interceptions, it's not like it was a crazy tipped pass or anything like that, or just a great interception just in general by the opposing defense. It was 2 very poor decisions that led to those interceptions. You look at the first one, just backed up against his own end zone, very basic route combination, I think just 4 verticals going up the field, and Jalen, just for whatever reason, throws it right down the middle into like a sea of Green Bay Packers defenders. Xavier McKinney just drifts over, picks it off, and that's the first one, right? They were fortunate not to get scored on by a touchdown off of that chance. I'll get to that a little bit later, but the second interception, they were in the red zone this time, and Jalen Hurts kind of drifts right, starts running that way, looks back across the middle of the field, and throws just a lollipop into the end zone, where, again, easily picked off by Jair Alexander, and the Eagles just completely throw away an opportunity there to at least get 3 points and make this win a little bit more convincing. But again, with that interception, with the first one, 2 bad decisions by Jalen Hurts, and I think that, along with some other throws that I think Jalen Hurts would like to get back in this game. You look at the decision-making on some of them. There was a play, I want to say in the second half, where just simply A.J. Brown tries to run a slant route. Jair Alexander's all over it, just basically beats him to the spot, gets in front of him, and A.J. Brown sort of stops on that slant path. And Jalen Hurts, I think the timing of everything with the route, supposed to go to A.J. Brown, just throws it anyway, not really going through his progressions or turning away based on the fact that Jair is already in front of AJ. He still throws it, and Jair almost intercepts his second pass of the game. That's one throw. And then another one, again in the second half, a quick just throw to the flats for Jalen Hurts on the left side. And again, another defender was very close to it. And if you quickly look at it, the defender's sitting right there. Maybe you go through the progressions and just not throw it. But I think a lot of times with Jalen and going through the timing of everything, wanting to get everything in order and know where the ball's supposed to go, with the timing and stuff like that, you look at who you're supposed to go to and you don't really pay attention to everything else. He throws it anyway, and it's almost a pick six going the other way because the defender's sitting right there, right? It's not a positive play. You gain negative yards, and again, you're lucky that it wasn't returned for an interception. So it's things like that and other decision-making, plays where on an option route, he decides to keep it where he should have let Saquon run it. All those little things like that might not be eye-catching as soon as you're watching it. It's just another play. They'll go through it, and the game keeps moving on. But when you dig into it a little bit deeper, it becomes a bigger conversation, right? When you're talking about the Eagles and their aspirations for this year, right? Once you see things like that, it might frustrate Eagles fans, and then you start thinking, oh, well, if they were playing like the 49ers or the Lions or something like that, this would come back and bite them. And that's where this topic about these concerns start to get a little bit more significant with Jalen. It's only 1 week. I don't want to blow this up any more than it is, but all teams have their struggles, but I feel like it is something that should be acknowledged and shouldn't be clouded by the scoreboard and just think that the Eagles won and everybody played great. It all comes relative to how they played. And I think with the Eagles, you just realize that Jalen didn't have a good game, but you're very fortunate to have guys like Saquon, AJ, Devontae, and a good defensive performance that I will get to in just a little bit. And sticking to Saquon with this whole situation with Jalen and how now going forward you can try to help him improve on some of these decisions. That's where Saquon is massive for this offense, right? Because he can take over a game like we saw, right? In the red zone, they're going to be more efficient. In the passing game, protection, whatever you'd like with Saquon, he is as close as you can get to a complete running back. And I think he can come in, alleviate some of that pressure from Jalen and take over a game where Jalen isn't forced to kind of throw himself out of the game, basically, right? If they're down or something like that, or their offense is struggling, he doesn't feel like he needs to throw the ball to get them going. Hand the ball off to Saquon. Very safe play overall, generally, and Saquon can get and do the most out of the opportunities that he gets. He usually does. With the great offensive line that they have, they could just hand it to Saquon like 8 times in a row, and they're going to be pretty successful overall. So that's one thing, and plus you throw in the matchup nightmare that he is. You saw it on the first touchdown that he caught, a wheel route out the back of the backfield towards the left side, going up, catching it like a wide receiver, almost over 2 guys. That's insane for a running back, and then you think that was caught on like 2 DBs, if I'm not mistaken. And then if you ever get him on a linebacker, that's a very favorable matchup for the Eagles as well. So those are the things that Saquon brings to this offense that will make it a little bit easier for Jalen to not maybe make some more intricate decisions where he just feels like he has to throw it or it's supposed to go there, so we're going to force it there. With Saquon, I think you can make it a little bit simpler for Jalen in this regard. And also, speaking of making it simpler, I think Kellen Moore did a great job calling the offense as well, kind of pointing out what the opposing defense was doing with some shifts, some pre-snap motion, a lot of motion actually, in the shotgun, under center, things like that, that once you get a little bit of motion going, you see if a defensive back follows you, or your receiver, I should say, and you can kind of understand that they're in some sort of man, some sort of zone, and then you can make it, you can take away almost a step for Jalen Hurts, essentially, right? Knowing that it is man or it is zone, and making it a little bit easier that way for him in that regard. And also, then you start thinking about what I mentioned before, right? This worked against the Green Bay Packers, right? But is this going to work against other more experienced defenses, I could say, experienced in bigger moments, I should say, like the 49ers, like the Lions, I guess, just off the back of this year? Can they get by with an okay game from Jalen Hurts, with Saquon Barkley playing very well in the playoffs, so to say, in this scenario? And that's where finally, I mentioned before, the defense. That's where the defense comes in, right? I think they also can play a pivotal role and kind of hiding the fact that Jalen isn't necessarily taking over a game, isn't orchestrating a game, but when the defense is able to lock everything down and sort of bend but not break once they're in the red zone, I think that's huge, because if you look in the Packers game, not only did Saquon complement Jalen and make it easier for him, but this defense really allowed, Green Bay to drive down the field, potentially get into the red zone, and they just shut everything down, only allowing field goals rather than touchdowns. You look at that first interception, right? Terrible mistake by Jalen Hurts to give the Packers field position essentially 10 to 15 yards away from the red zone. The defense locks everything down. They hold the fort, so to say, and they only give up 3, where really they probably should have given up 7. If one of those field goals where the Eagles defense didn't lock everything down, if one of those field goals turns into a touchdown, with how Jalen Hurts played with those 2 interceptions and some questionable mistakes, Green Bay probably ends up winning this game, and then this massive game from Saquon is almost thrown away because Jalen becomes the story, right? He becomes the problem, and it becomes even more of a headline everywhere. But that's where I think some of these weapons now, with the Eagles having the luxury of having such a talented roster, can kind of mask these mistakes right now. They're talented enough to get by most of their schedule, I would probably say. Most of their division, certainly. They're better than all those teams in their division. They're more talented, at least, I should say. So they're going to be too talented to not put up points, but I want to see a scenario where maybe the defense is giving up those touchdowns, and then what happens when you find yourself trailing in a game, right? You necessarily don't want to run the football. Saquon kind of gets taken out of the equation, and now you rely on Jalen to make those throws, to kind of decipher defenses on his own, make the right read, call out the right pressure, the right formation, and everything like that. I want to see Jalen in those situations. It didn't work out great for him, but they got the win in week 1. So that's the most important thing right now. We have a lot of time for these things to work themselves out, but that is where I want to see it, right? Where everything's even. Both defenses just can't stop the opposing offense. Offenses are going back and forth. Talent out of the stadium. The difference is going to be the quarterbacks. Which quarterback can make the right read, make the less mistakes in the game. And unfortunately, if Jalen, can't improve on this, it's going to be very obvious when he does become the issue, if that ever gets to it, and he makes a mistake, he makes the wrong read. And for as talented as the Eagles are, if they find themselves trailing and Jalen can't, necessarily bring them out of that or make the necessary throws, then there's going to be a bigger discussion about, how Jalen might not be the right quarterback, or has he developed enough? Is he considered one of the best quarterbacks? All those sort of things will come up if and only if we get to that point, but we're still a long ways away. But it is something to at least acknowledge right at this point. The Eagles looked near perfect. Their defense played great. They won the game, put up a bunch of points, but there is always something to work on, and especially at the quarterback spot. It is something that Jalen will have to improve on. I have confidence in him. I'm a fan of Jalen Hurts. I believe that he has everything to be a top quarterback, but there's that one little thing that you still need to see get a little bit more refined as we go on. But speaking of going on, we have some more topics to get to on today's show. Looking at the Steelers, now going into week 2, probably starting Justin Fields, we look at a situation where their main target was George Pickens, but he's going up against Patrick Surtain. The outlook on that matchup, what does George Pickens think of that, and do they have enough outside of George Pickens if he's not as impactful as he was to win this game, and what kind of effect could that have on Justin Fields in this game as well? We get into all of that after this break. We'll be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to move on to this topic now about the Steelers quarterback. The Steelers somehow got the win in week 1. They didn't score a touchdown. They'd have to be one of the handful of teams that didn't score a touchdown. Like the Giants, I know, are one. The Steelers, and then other than that, unless I'm completely missing an obvious one, it's hard to win a game without scoring a touchdown. But that's what the Steelers did. I guess I shouldn't be surprised watching them for seasons now that this is just the storyline. But now, talking about moving forward, the Steelers will travel to Denver to play Bo Nix in his home debut after the Steelers beat Atlanta. Denver fell to the Seattle Seahawks, so different scenarios for these two teams, and Justin Fields is looking like he is getting prepared to start again over an injured Russell Wilson. Today there were some more optimistic news around Russ that he is getting better. He told media that he was getting closer, but it didn't sound too optimistic, so I'm going to assume that it is still going to be Justin Fields. And with that being the case, not really, going back to the no touchdowns thing, not really an impressive start for Justin Fields, but just to come to his defense a little bit, you're preparing all week, or at least until Wednesday or Thursday, as Russ is going to be the starter, right? And then he pops up on the injury report, and then you kind of got to get everything together in sort of a panic mode and get Justin Fields in here and kind of mold the offense differently than you would with Russell Wilson, right? You know, you're going to call the same plays, essentially, you would think, but they're different quarterbacks, right? You could do some more mobile things with Justin Fields. You could sneak it. You could RPO and things like that. Not so resonant in the Steelers offense, but it does give you the option to do that. Whereas with Russ, you might not call something like that. Maybe not too many bootlegs or rollouts or play actions like that because he's not as athletic. These sort of things go into the game plan leading up until this week. And there was a lot of, I guess, just nitpicking or criticism that the Steelers still didn't look that explosive on offense because they ignored the middle of the field. But I thought it was interesting that Arthur Smith mentioned today that they tried to avoid the middle of the field to not have Jesse Bates affect the game in any way possible, to limit, the time, with a limited time to adjust to the offense around Justin Fields. I think this makes sense, and it should change this week, right? I don't want them to be, afraid to throw it down the middle of the field, and I could kind of understand why, with a late switch there at quarterback, why you wouldn't want to risk anything with limited time there to adjust. So that makes sense, but I'm expecting more this week out of the Steelers and Justin Fields, and really overall, it's another great opportunity to, I think, really now get a good look of what we could have with Justin Fields, because you have a full week of practice knowing most likely that you're going to be the starter. We can get a good evaluation of what a whole week of practice looks like, hypothetically, if Russell Wilson wasn't there, a whole week of practice for Justin Fields, knowing that he is going to be the starter, but obviously knowing that Russ is still trying to get back and get better. This is a great opportunity for Justin Fields, not only for us to see him, but for himself to really nail down his case to be the starter. And last week, George Pickens was a big part of how Justin Fields went about his business, how successful the Steelers were overall. And now it could be a little bit different in Denver because George Pickens, AJ Terrell, don't want to take anything away from him, great corner. But now we're talking about, I think, a different class here, right? We're talking about Pat Surtain. He's probably going to follow George everywhere that he goes, and arguably the best defensive back in the league. In my opinion, he is the best. He's getting paid like it now, for sure. He's going to be on your best receiver. And not to diminish what George is capable of, I take George over any corner, being a fan, but it is different. You do acknowledge the fact that this is a little bit of a different matchup, different strategy, different approach if you're Justin Fields as well in regards to where you can throw the ball around Pat Surtain. George can catch the ball, it seems like, anywhere, but Patrick is going to give him probably the biggest challenge he's seen in his career, right, overall for George Pickens. And George was actually asked about, his matchup with Pat Surtain this upcoming weekend, and he said the following. He said, just be myself. To be honest, I went up against Pat Surtain in college, so a lot of this stuff isn't new to me. He's just a good player, just like a lot of the other players in here. There's good players. I'm a good player. There's a lot of good players around the league. And going back to what George Pickens mentioned in college, when George was at Alabama and when Pat was at, George was at Georgia and Pat Surtain was at Alabama. I think it was 2020 or 2021, either one of those years. In that previous matchup, Surtain allowed 2 receptions for 21 yards on 4 targets in a 41-24 win for Alabama over Georgia. So, he played pretty well on Georgia in that game. Obviously, been a long time now. Both of them are tremendously better. But it is interesting to see how their last matchup went with these two guys. So, with that being the case, now comes the question, the statement, right? The Steelers need more contributions out of somebody else if George does happen to have not the typical George Pickens game where he is a down-the-field threat, where he is covered, double covered potentially if you have Pat on him, and then you maybe throw over a safety over the top. It becomes impossible to just force-feed George the ball. Not to say that you can't throw it to him. Maybe they scheme him open, put him in the slot or something like that, but you're going to need something else regardless. If you want to be considered a good team, a good offense, be an efficient offense, you need somebody else to step up. And in the game against Atlanta, the next receiver to have the most receptions outside of George was Pat Freiermuth, and all the other receivers, interestingly enough, combined, all the other receivers had 7 receptions combined to Pat's 4 and George Pickens' 8. So, that says a lot, that most of these guys were only getting receptions once, twice, or at most 3 times in that game for Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, and guys like that. You're going to need more than that, obviously. You're going to need another guy to have 7 or 6 receptions just on his own, not combined as a team, right? As much as the Steelers want to say that they want to run the ball, it's a passing league now. You need your quarterback, your receivers to be at least adequate and contributing at an average level, right? No touchdowns in a game is not sustainable. So I'm looking at guys like Pat Freiermuth. It's interesting because Arthur Smith mentioned that thing about not throwing it over the middle of the field, and I think now in this game, I'm expecting that to change, and that way, I think you can involve Pat a little bit more, try to attack those linebackers, try to attack maybe the zones that Denver is in, because Denver is a good defense. The Falcons are also a good defense, but I think Denver's a little bit different, more so in the fact that they're a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more experienced, if that makes sense, with Sean Payton there. Different level of experience between facing a guy like Raheem Morris, very good at the defensive side of the ball, but it is different when you're playing a guy that's been in the league as long as probably at least Mike Tomlin and Sean Payton. So it's going to be more of a chess match that way, and that's usually how it works out with defenses. If you have an experienced coach, a successful one, they know how to build a defense and be very successful. So I'll be looking to the Steelers offense to see how they kind of combat that in this game. But Freiermuth is certainly someone that could get more involved in the middle of the field for the Steelers to open up that offense a little bit more. It's a big chance for Justin Fields to get a good grab of this job, but he'll need others to kind of step up in this case. That's a worry, obviously, that you had with the Steelers going into the season. That's why they were rumored with Brandon Ayuk. That's why they were rumored with Cortland Sutton and all these other guys. Because in matchups like this, when George eventually throughout the rest of this year is going to be double covered, you need somebody else to step up. And it is interesting mentioning this topic about Justin Fields and how this could be a great opportunity for him, and how, with Russell potentially coming back soon, if Justin doesn't take advantage of this opportunity, what does that mean for him in this quarterback battle that we have going on? And that's where ESPN's Jeremy Fowler mentioned the following regarding Russell Wilson. He said, "The belief is that Wilson will get the job once he returns from his calf injury. Pittsburgh believes Wilson's command of the offense is stronger, and it seems like only an explosive performance from Fields can change the trajectory." So it's giving more of a reason why Justin Fields has a lot riding on this game, not just to get the win, obviously, and they're never going to play up the fact that this is a quarterback battle that they want to be starting. Obviously, they want to be starting, but they don't want to mention how they have to perform very well to kind of win that job, right, if that makes sense. So with this report, with Justin, doing the job last week, getting the job done, but really not blowing everybody away. This is another great opportunity now to take a good hold of that passing wise, because I think running, we all kind of know what Justin is, what he brings in that regard. But passing wise, I want to see some throws over the middle. I want to see more of a command from Justin, more timing, more rhythmic throws with this team, not just deep shots down the field, because that's also not sustainable. I want to see some sort of methodical aspect to this offense, and a lot of that will come through Arthur Smith, so hopefully that all works itself out. I'm anticipating Freiermuth to get involved a little bit more, run heavy. A already run heavy offense should benefit Justin Fields even more in play actions, rollouts, and things like that. It should help the wide receivers too. Also, if Denver is getting killed in the running game, they're gonna bring more bodies down near the box, near the line of scrimmage, and it'll give these receivers more of a one-on-one opportunity, for George on Patrick if you want to test that out. It'll all work itself out if we get a good overall performance from this offense, right? There's a lot riding on Justin. Obviously, you need touchdowns. Too much to ask for your defense, as good as they are. You can't just not score touchdowns and expect your defense to bail you out, basically. So it's a lot in just this game on how that matchup will go with George and Patrick, how that offense will be affected, how Justin Fields will be affected. All of that are going to be sort of, test marks, little tests, little quizzes as we go on through that game on how Justin evolves through that. And I think if he gets a win here, and again, playing better than he did last week, who knows where this quarterback job will go going forward. If they still think it's Russ, I think it'll be a lot tougher if the Steelers are 2-0 to go back to him. But, we'll see on that. That's sort of an overview of what the Steelers have facing them this week in week 2. But now we will move on to some more topics that I wanted to bring up, just thinking about these segments. We're going to look at a bunch of 0-1 teams in this next segment, a bunch of 0-1 teams that are playing each other, and we're just going to basically go through those games and decide which one of these teams needs the win more and needs to go to at least 1-1, and the effects of what could be going 0-2 this early in the season. That is coming up, as well as later on, giving my picks for some of the week 2 games as well this weekend. A couple more segments coming up in today's show. We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here on the show to get into this topic that I wanted to bring up on today's episode, looking at which teams are 0-1. A lot of surprises we had in the first week, on some surprising upsets like the Patriots over the Bengals, and you could even say good teams finding themselves in an 0-1 position, like the Ravens, like the Colts potentially, surprising a lot of people with how well they competed against the Houston Texans, the Jets as well. There's a lot of good teams here that need a win, I believe, in my opinion, this week to kind of not only get back on track, but not have more pressure pile up on them, if that makes sense. So we're going to look through all these 0-1 matchups that we have in week 2 and just decide what is going into these games and who needs the win more in all of these matchups. So moving into our first team, our first matchup of 0-1 against 0-1 teams, we have coming up here the Colts at the Green Bay Packers, right? The Colts off of a loss to the Houston Texans, but they didn't play bad whatsoever, honestly. It was a score of 29-27, and, I think for a lot of it, my critiques of the Colts were that the running game was sort of there with Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor. The big plays were certainly there, right? Everybody saw that amazing throw by Anthony Richardson to Alec Pierce. There was another one also down the field as well. But I'd like to see it be more efficient, not just so sudden, right? With just a bomb down the field and having it work out for you. Most of the time, as we go through the weeks, that is going to be tried to be taken away. So I would like to see more of a steady, put together offensive sequence from these guys. But regardless of that, they still played well. They played up to the level of competition with Houston. So I like the Colts and their outlook in this game, especially because on the other side, we have Jordan Love less Packers, right? You see Malik Willis up there on the graphic, and it's concerning, right? Because you look at that game against the Eagles, as much as it was a close game or potentially written off, you still had Jordan Love just get hurt in that last sequence, which is just so unlucky for this team with how much pressure is placed upon them just right off of the bat based on what we saw from Jordan Love last year. It's a lot now, and especially in that division, it could be something that could come back to bite them if they start 0-2. I don't see the Lions dropping many games. Once they play each other, those matchups start to become more significant because you try to make up games now if you start 0-2. And, based off of that, these are two good teams overall. I want to make that clear. Both of them could have been 1-0 if you really look at those games, but because that wasn't the case, because I'm so impressed with Indianapolis, even though it's in Green Bay, I think I'm going to go with the Colts just because I think they continue to build on this momentum that they had in that first game. When you play up to a level of competition like that, it usually kind of surprises you in a way, and it fills you even more with confidence knowing that you were that close to winning that game. So I like the Colts in this one to go to 1-1. And now at 0-2, the Packers, what does that mean for Jordan Love? When does he come back? It's going to have a big effect on them. I think Jordan Love, as much as Matt LaFleur wants to say that the door is still open for him to play this week, I think he will at least miss this game, and then he could potentially be back in week 3 against the Minnesota Vikings. But I like the Colts' chances of going 1-1 after this game. Then we move on to the Raiders at the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens are 9-point favorites in this game. Both of them are 0-1, where the Ravens could make a good case that they should be 1-0. There are still some questions about them, though, on how they use Derrick Henry, how often they use them, and how he fits in the overall offense with getting Mark Andrews more involved because he really wasn't a factor. Isaiah Likely now, how much more do you use him after his breakout performance? Zay Flowers was a prominent figure in the offense. And then you have Lamar, also his running ability. There's a lot of the ball to go around, but you just can't not use Derrick Henry, right? So that's something that they're going to have to wrestle with going forward. But overall, their defense also looked a little bit shaky, but they still have good players overall on that defense, whereas the Raiders are in more of a dire outlook in this week, in week 2. Just, their offense lacked explosiveness, any sort of creativity. The running game really wasn't there with Zamir White. I feel like the Raiders need this win more based on the question, right, in week 2, but I feel like the Ravens are going to end up winning this game, but in terms of need and effect that this could have, I think that goes for the Raiders, like I said, because if I were to say went to the Ravens, I think even at 0-2, I think people wouldn't jump off that bandwagon. So the Raiders, I think, need this win. I don't think they're going to get it, but they need it just so it could give some more confidence to Gardner Minshew in making that decision. You don't want Devontae Adams to be upset, frustrated, and then you get some outlandish comments afterwards. So it's very delicate right now for the Raiders because I like the players that they have, but I think they just need to piece it together a little bit more. Maybe it's not this week. I'm not expecting it to be, but maybe at least a good performance could go a long way for them. And then moving on to our next game that I have here, the Browns and the Jaguars. two former Clemson quarterbacks, Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. The Jaguars and really the Browns also had struggling offenses in their last games. They struggled to get things going really in either the run game and the passing game, again, for both teams. And the Jaguars were shut out in the second half, which isn't something that is acceptable, really, with how they'd like to be looked at in the NFL compared to other teams. You can't just be shut out and give up that lead in the second half. So that's one thing. They basically gave the win away to the Dolphins, where it would have been a big win for them, getting it on the road. And a lot of the similarities with the Browns, them, their offense, Deshaun Watson, we've talked about it a lot already this week. They desperately need Deshaun to at least show them something. I don't think Houston Deshaun is coming back at all or anytime soon, so it doesn't have to be Houston Deshaun, but at least show us something that we could work with, right? Joe Flacco, show us, no disrespect to Joe Flacco, but show us the Joe Flacco level of coming off of your couch, walking in, being the starting quarterback. At least show us that level, right? You don't have to be an MVP candidate. You don't have to be a comeback player of the year, but Deshaun has to pick it up a little bit more. This team is too talented to start 0-2. This Browns team is way too talented. Their defense is way too good. And also, more pressure, more frustration is growing after week 1 for Deshaun. So I feel like Cleveland needs this win more because they're a better roster, and I think there's more expectations on them in 2024 than there is that placed on the Jaguars. So also, just to close it out, Deshaun Watson's reputation is also, they can't take many more hits on Deshaun Watson's reputation, right? He's already been chastised throughout this week and leading up to this year, so they can't take many more hits, many more body blows to Deshaun, and not expect for fans and people to be calling for his job. So all of that to just say Cleveland definitely needs this win more over the Jaguars. Again, on the road for Cleveland. Hopefully Deshaun can show us something there in that game. Then a couple more games here. We have the Jets and the Titans in this next matchup. Back-to-back road games for the New York Jets. Their offense played better than their defense, where on the other side, the Titans' defense definitely played better than their offense. The Titans should be 1-0. They didn't allow an offensive touchdown, but they somehow still lost the game, and somehow the Bears ended up scoring 24 points. The defense didn't give up a single touchdown, so that's just crazy that happened to be the case. Will Levis, we're not going to talk about the throw that he made. Obviously, shouldn't have done that. So now moving forward moving to the Jets, I should say, there should be more help around Garrett Wilson. I think we're going to see more of that in this week against the Tennessee Titans. They should, and I feel like they are going to establish Breece Hall a little bit more. Their defense, I'm expecting to respond after getting just exposed against the 49ers. So all of that wrapped into one. And the fact that Will Levis, didn't have a great week 1. He also needs to bounce back in the passing game because they didn't really involve DeAndre Hopkins too much. So that's something that obviously should be addressed. But I feel like the Jets need this win more with how, the whole Hassan Reddick situation and their defense as well. The coaching as well. There's a lot of pressure on Robert Saleh and even Nathaniel Hackett as well. And Aaron Rodgers, going into the media saying that everybody just needs to relax a little bit. So if you say that, you can't fall to 0-2 right after that. So I think the Jets will get this win. I think they need it more, and I feel like they'll get it certainly in this game. Then here also talking about the Giants and the Commanders, the need for me has to go to the Commanders just because the Giants, saying whatever you want about Daniel Jones, I don't think it'll make that much of a difference. So, speaking about Daniel Jones, it's hard at this point to hit a new low with him, but you can't be outplayed by a rookie quarterback with only one top-tier weapon. Even if the argument could be made that the Giants only have one top-tier weapon as well, Daniel Jones has been in the league for, I don't know, maybe like 4 years at least or something like that. Jaden Daniels is in his first year. Yeah, you might say he's more talented, but you can't be drastically outplayed by him. One of the worst teams, arguably, in the NFL, in the Giants as well. So Daniel Jones enters this week with a lot of pressure, obviously. Daniels, on the other side, was the entire offense for the Commanders in their game against the Bucs. So this one should be a bit closer, and I'm anticipating the Commanders scored 20 points in that game. So I feel like their offense, their team is in a better spot. They need to win more. They should win this game. They are a better team than the Giants. They have a better quarterback than them. I have more expectations for them, basically, as to why I feel the Commanders need this win even more than the Giants. And then lastly here, to just wrap it up quickly, the Rams and the Arizona Cardinals. Back-to-back road games for the Rams. I was surprised by how good the Cardinals' offense played, but their defense didn't live up to that, so that is a concern. The Rams, on the other hand, were killed by injuries, so how do they change things, forcefully, with having to adjust to a new O-line? How does that affect the run game? Is Matthew Stafford going to be protected? All of those things wrapped into one. Also, on the Cardinals side, how much more is Marvin Harrison Jr. involved after only getting, I think, one reception for 4 yards against the Bills? So, with that being the case, the need to win this game has to be the Los Angeles Rams. They have a big mountain to climb in this one with those injuries. I really think it has crippled them greatly to start the year. But the expectations and the sort of need to survive, really, apart from these injuries, I think is going to be huge for them. If they could keep their head above water and win this game, because they need to win this game, it's going to benefit them a lot. Once Puka comes back, once that offensive line gets healthy, the Rams need to win this game. I think they're capable of doing it because the Cardinals' defense wasn't that great. So the need goes to the Rams to win this game overall. And that's all the games of 0-1 teams facing off against each other. But we have one more segment to get to on today's show. Just going through my game picks on the first couple of games here in week 2, and I'll finish that up with the rest of the games in tomorrow's show as well. So stay tuned. I'm going to give you some game picks here for the start of the NFL week 2 regular season games here, kicking off with the Bills and the Miami Dolphins in just a few minutes. We'll be right back. Thank you for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. And to wrap up today's show, we're going to go into some of my game picks for the start of the NFL regular season week 2 games kicking off tonight between the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins. I gave my pick for the game tonight. I have the Dolphins winning tonight's game by a score of 30-20 over the Buffalo Bills. And now, to give you guys the rest of the games that I wanted to bring to you guys on today's show. Not the full slate, because I frankly wouldn't have enough time to get through all of them. So we have 7 games here that I wanted to bring up here and just give my thoughts and split it up between today and tomorrow's show. So looking at the first game here that we have at the top left of your screen, we have the Colts taking on the Green Bay Packers, 1 p.m. there. No Jordan Love. We just finished talking about this game a little bit. So going over, quickly over it, if the Colts struggle with their passing game, the lack of consistency, not just deep shots down the field, but really putting together some well put together drives, using the run game a little bit more efficiently, then it could be a low scoring game if they don't improve the passing game a little bit more. Willis really worries me for the side of the Green Bay Packers, because it's almost like taking away what makes this offense so great with having so many weapons, the variety of wide receivers that you can go to. If Malik Willis can't get them the ball, you become pretty one-dimensional in that aspect. So that's something that really has me concerned. But with that being said, Green Bay's running game with Josh Jacobs, maybe you could look to that a little bit more. It showed some flashes in week 1 against the Philadelphia Eagles. You're going to need more in this game, obviously, but you look at who you're going up against. The Colts gave up a touchdown and 159 rushing yards to Joe Mixon last week, so you have some optimism there that you could do the same with Josh Jacobs to kind of limit the mistakes that maybe Malik Willis could make, so that's something else. Likewise, though, if you look on the other side and what Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor can work with, Green Bay just gave up a big game to Saquon as well, so that's something else that the Colts can take advantage of as well. And the combination of being almost one-dimensional with the Packers and having the Colts kind of expect that going into this game, I think the Colts would barely win this game behind Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor and that run game. I like the chances that they have here. I think it'll be a big win for them. Anthony Richardson showed a lot of potential. I have the Colts winning in this game. Then moving down the line, we have the Steelers at the Denver Broncos. Bo Nix's home debut. Justin Fields should be getting the start again, like we said before, after a full weeks of practice. A great opportunity to take hold of that starting quarterback job. You expect Bo Nix to play better in his second game now, especially at home. He's a little bit more athletic, definitely more athletic and more mobile than the quarterback the Steelers had to deal with last week in Kirk Cousins. So from a perspective on the Steelers defense, that's something that you have to adjust to, be a little bit more disciplined with that as well. Then you have a top-tier level coach now in Sean Payton. Not to discredit Raheem Morris, but Sean Payton has been in the game for a lot longer. So also I just saw Mike Tomlin is 0-3 against Sean Payton in his career. All of those are with the New Orleans Saints and Drew Brees as well, obviously. So now with the Broncos, we'll see if Mike Tomlin can break that streak. And, it goes back into playing into that fact that experienced coaches going up against them is obviously a lot tougher. The run game for Denver wasn't really there, but their defense caused 2 safeties against the Seattle Seahawks. So it's a unit that is very underrated, the Steelers, and some of their questionable tackle positions should be aware of this fact, obviously, with Denver being a bit more underrated, like I said. And injuries are also something else to watch with this Broncos team. There was some positive news today that Garrett Bowles, their center, and Josh Reynolds were upgraded from not participating to limited, at least today, in their practice today. So that was something that was beneficial. But overall, I think the Steelers win with a couple of rushing touchdowns. They finally scored a touchdown in this season of the NFL. So I like the Steelers' chances here. I think they're more talented on the offensive side of the ball with both running backs, with their identity. I think they get finally into the end zone here and win this game. Then moving on to the next game, the Raiders and the Baltimore Ravens. Like I said before, the Ravens are 9-point favorites. They should handle their business here. The defense may have lost some of their punch from last year, but I think they're definitely good enough to handle Gardner Minshew and this Raiders offense based on what we saw last week. If they can't get the running game going, if Zamir White can't get anything going and they become one-dimensional against this Ravens team, they're just going to pin their ears back and get after Gardner Minshew, and it's not going to be good for anybody on Sunday for the Raiders if that is the case. And you have arguably the best running team versus the Raiders defense that gave up 135 yards to J.K. Dobbins last week. Not to discredit J.K. Dobbins, I love seeing that from him, but it's not a good sign when you have Derrick Henry coming in, Lamar Jackson as well. It's not a good picture. That's why I have Baltimore winning this game by a couple touchdowns at least at home in their home debut at M&T Bank Stadium. Then moving to the next column here, the Browns and the Jacksonville Jaguars, two former Clemson quarterbacks again. Disappointing offenses from both sides in week one. The loss, actually, recently of the Jaguars' top defensive back, Tyus Campbell. He was placed on IR just recently, if not today, then yesterday. He's going to be out for the next 4 weeks, which is crippling for this Jaguars defense, especially because their secondary and their next level of defense was their biggest concern for me with that unit, and their defensive line is great, but with Amari Cooper, with Jerry Jeudy, David Njoku's not going to play, so that makes it a little bit more even, but not as even as Tyus Campbell being out. I think that's going to be huge for the Jaguars defense in this game. Cleveland's defense should also hold up better against the Jaguars, right? You lose Calvin Ridley, you bring in Gabe Davis, Brian Thomas looked nice, but on the other side, you have Denzel Ward, who is going to take away one of them for sure, and that pass rush is going to get after Jacksonville as well, like we saw Miami do in week one. All of that, I'm expecting the Browns defense to kind of rebound after last week. I'm a little bit concerned if the tackles aren't back for the Cleveland Browns. You know, they weren't there in week one, and you saw how successful the Cowboys defense was with Eric Armstead, with Trayvon Walker on the opposite side, Jonathan Allen Hines also for the Jaguars. That could be a weak point that they could try to exploit, but ultimately, I don't think it'll be enough. I feel like Watson has to play better. It's hard to play worse than he did. So with that, I think Cleveland will win this game with a dominating display from their defense. Then moving down the line, the Jets play the Tennessee Titans as well. Back-to-back road games for them. What I saw on offense for the Jets wasn't bad at all. It just died off a little bit as we went on through the game. Sustainability, consistency is something that will build with this offense. I'm very confident in them and Aaron Rodgers. And Tennessee's defense played very well. They didn't give up any touchdowns, but complementing their defense with their offense, I think, is still a week away. I didn't really like how Will Levis played. And also, their defense played very well against a rookie quarterback making his first start at home. Now they're playing the complete opposite of that, right, in Aaron Rodgers. After another week of work, more reps for that offense, I think Rodgers and the Jets will win this game in a more balanced, complementary way. The Jets defense will play better, and with that, I think Will Levis will struggle again in this game. So I have the Jets winning in a very balanced, pretty convincing way at Tennessee. Then the last two games here, San Francisco at Minnesota. Darnold playing against his former team, hosting his former team, and Minnesota, an offense that looked very good, albeit against the Giants. But their defense is their best side of that team for New York. So going up against this Giants defense for Sam Darnold, it looked pretty well because that is the better side of their team. Darnold didn't look too bad also, executing on all of his throws, most of them. He did have an interception, but he did spread the ball around pretty well. The running game with Aaron Jones looked pretty impressive overall, and Aaron Jones, familiar with the Niners defense, played them in the playoffs last year, had a good game against them there, albeit with Green Bay. But overall, you look at San Francisco as well, arguably among the best teams in the NFL. I expect more from Brandon Ayuk this week, getting back more into the rhythm of things. Jordan Mason looked great. Will Christian McCaffrey play in this one? That is yet to be determined. The defensive line for San Francisco also impressed me as well. Minnesota will have to do a lot more than they had to do with the Giants defense to kind of negate the defense for the 49ers, but I feel like San Fran is just a little bit too much for them. It'll be headline front page worthy news if Sam Darnold beats the 49ers. Minnesota beat them last year overall, but it was with Kirk Cousins, so there is some revenge there for the 49ers. I think they will get it this time in a close game. However, I think the Minnesota Vikings will play them close. And then lastly, not too much to talk about. The Chargers were one of the pleasant surprises I saw in Week 1. I think that continues on in this game. The main reason being that the Chargers stayed true to what Jim Harbaugh wanted to be, a run-heavy team, defense-heavy team as well. J.K. Dobbins, we saw what he did to the Raiders defense in Week 1. Now you're playing a worse defense in the Panthers, who gave up nearly 50 points without Derek Brown in the middle of their defensive line. I think it's going to be more of the same for the Chargers. And also, the level of experience, going back to that point that I made, you have a first ever head coach in Dave Canales going up against a successful, experienced Jim Harbaugh. I think we're going to see the difference in that. So I have the Chargers winning pretty convincingly as well in this game, going to 2-0, surprising everybody who might not have thought the Chargers could have had a good year this year. They start the year 2-0, and that's going to do it for this half of my game picks. We're going to get to the rest of them tomorrow, but for right now, that is going to do it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. If you want to see more of the GSMC Chip Shot Football podcast, check out the network's both YouTube channels. There are 2 YouTube channels to catch a lot more content in a variety of different ways on this show around the NFL. And lastly, catch more of the live shows every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We have one more to get to tomorrow to close out the week before we are fully integrated into Week 2 of the NFL. We're going to get to watching that Buffalo Bills game. We're going to talk about it a bit more tomorrow. But for right now, thank you for watching. I've been your host, Manny Maradiege. I'll see you guys back here again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't